The hamburger did not begin as fast food. In 19th century America, its closest documented ancestor was Hamburg steak, chopped beef associated with German restaurants, served on a plate and eaten with a knife and fork. Then, industrial workers needed lunch they could carry. Vendors put the meat between bread. In 1921, White Castle made it uniform, visible, and respectable. In 1948, the McDonald brothers redesigned an entire kitchen around producing it at speed. An immigrant-associated meal had become more than a sandwich. It had become the operating system of fast food. The name points across the Atlantic, to Hamburg, one of Europe's great port cities. That does not mean a modern hamburger sailed intact from Germany to the United States. Food history is rarely that tidy. What traveled was a name, a reputation, and a family of chopped beef preparations. By the 19th century, mincing tougher or leftover cuts of meat was hardly unique to one country. Chopped meat appeared in many cuisines because it solved a practical problem. It made less tender beef easier to eat, allowed seasoning to be mixed throughout, and turned irregular pieces into a portion that could be cooked quickly. Hamburg added commercial prestige to that basic technique. As a major port, the city was associated abroad with trade, shipping, and beef. In the United States, Hamburg steak came to describe chopped or minced beef formed into a patty. German immigrants helped circulate the dish through restaurants, especially in cities such as New York, where a growing immigrant public ate familiar foods in unfamiliar surroundings. Surviving menus place Hamburg steak in New York restaurants by the 1870s. It was not yet the object most people picture today. There was no necessary soft bun, no fixed stack of lettuce, onion, pickle, cheese, and sauce. It arrived as a plate of meat, often accompanied by gravy or onions, and it belonged to the world of the knife and fork. That distinction matters. Calling this plate the first hamburger would make the story sound complete before its most important transformation had happened. The food had crossed a cultural boundary, but it had not yet crossed the boundary between a meal and a system. Migration created the starting point. The industrial city changed the job the food needed to perform. In the second half of the 19th century, American cities expanded around factories, rail yards, docks, offices, and workshops. For many workers, the workday no longer followed the rhythms of a nearby household meal. Home could be too far away. The break could be too short. Food needed to come to the worker, and it needed to be hot, cheap, and quick. Lunch wagons answered that demand. Some were little more than mobile counters. Others carried grills and served food into the night. Their menus favored items that could be cooked in a confined space and handed over with minimal ceremony. Hamburg steak was inexpensive, familiar to a large immigrant population, and suited to a hot griddle. It had one obvious weakness: a loose patty on a plate was inconvenient for someone standing on a pavement or returning to a shift. Bread solved that problem. Putting meat between bread was ancient. Putting this particular patty between bread was less a single flash of invention than a commercial adaptation waiting to happen. By the 1890s, American newspapers were describing hamburger sandwiches. One report from 1896 presented a hamburger steak sandwich as a 5-cent favorite, with patties kept ready and cooked while the customer waited. That small description contains nearly the entire future of fast food in miniature: a known price, a prepared portion, a hot surface, a short wait, and a meal designed to leave the premises. The sandwich changed the economics of Hamburg steak. A plate requires space, washing, cutlery, and time. Bread is food, container, and insulation at once. It holds the juices, protects the hand, and lets a customer eat while walking. The patty also makes cheap cuts more usable because grinding reduces their toughness and creates a uniform shape. This was food for a city that was learning to measure life by clocks, shifts, streetcar timetables, and factory whistles. The hamburger sandwich did not create that schedule. It fit it. That is why so many invention stories sound plausible. Seymour, Wisconsin, honors Charlie Negreen. Athens, Texas points to Fletcher Davis. New Haven, Connecticut celebrates Louis Lasson. The Menches brothers are attached to another claim. Different versions place the decisive moment at a fair, a lunch counter, or a busy stand where a customer needed meat made portable. The details conflict. Dates move. Ingredients change. Later retellings become cleaner than the surviving record. This uncertainty is not a failure of food history. It reveals something important about the product. When cities in several regions had ground beef, grills, bread, mobile workers, and public fairs, more than one vendor could arrive at a similar sandwich. The idea was practical enough to be invented repeatedly. The better question is not who first placed a patty between bread. It is who turned that practical sandwich into something customers would trust, recognize, and buy again in a different city. At the turn of the 20th century, the hamburger still carried a reputation problem. Ground meat concealed its origins. A whole cut could be inspected with the eye. Chopped beef made that harder. It could absorb scraps, fat, or meat of uncertain quality. Public anxiety about meatpacking intensified during the Progressive Era, when investigations and works such as Upton Sinclair's The Jungle exposed appalling conditions in parts of the industry. The hamburger was cheap, and cheap food often arrived with social suspicion attached. It was associated with stands, fairs, late-night counters, and customers who could not demand a formal dining room. Its strength was accessibility. Its weakness was that accessibility looked unsafe or disreputable to many middle-class consumers. The company that changed the hamburger status understood that selling the meat would not be enough. It had to sell proof. In Wichita, Kansas, a cook named Walter Anderson had been operating hamburger stands before he met Billy Ingram, an insurance and real estate businessman. Anderson understood the grill. Ingram understood what a system could do for a product whose reputation was unstable. In 1921, they opened White Castle. The name sounded permanent. The buildings looked clean and controlled. White surfaces, stainless steel, orderly interiors, and food prepared in view of the customer all worked as arguments. They told customers that nothing was being hidden behind a kitchen door. This was branding, but it also answered the broader suspicion surrounding cheap ground meat. White Castle did not ask customers to trust an unknown stand. It created a setting in which cleanliness could be watched. The hamburger itself was redesigned for repetition. It was small, square, thin, and inexpensive. Early White Castle hamburgers sold for 5 cents. A customer could buy several, and the company encouraged carry-out with the language of buying them by the sack. The price mattered, but price alone does not create a chain. The deeper innovation was that the experience could be recognized. A customer who entered another White Castle did not have to negotiate a new menu, judge a new kitchen, or learn a new cook's habits. The architecture, surfaces, portion, and process announced that the result would be familiar. White Castle matched the industrial imagination of the 1920s. American factories had made standardization look modern. Interchangeable parts promised that a product would work the same way regardless of the individual who assembled it. White Castle applied a similar confidence to lunch. Its grill was organized, its patties were measured, its buns and meat were designed around a repeatable sequence. As the business expanded, the company developed supporting production and supply operations to keep the restaurants consistent. The famous White Building, therefore, did more than attract attention. It made an invisible promise visible. This meal had been turned into a controlled product. The hamburger was ideal for that transformation. A steak varies in thickness, grain, tenderness, and cooking time. A mixed stew takes time and resists exact portioning. A small ground beef patty can be shaped to a specification, cooked on a flat surface, placed in bread, and handed over in seconds. Every variation that had once belonged to a cook could be narrowed. White Castle demonstrated that many American customers would accept sameness when it signaled safety, speed, and value. The Immigrant associated patty had now become chain architecture. The next business would turn that architecture into a production line. By the 1930s, the hamburger had moved far from the dubious fairground snack. It was becoming a mainstream meal. Yet White Castle kept its restaurants under close company control. Its system spread, but not through the vast franchise network that would later define fast food. The next leap happened in Southern California, where the automobile was reorganizing the restaurant before the restaurant reorganized the world. Drive-ins made sense in a landscape of expanding roads and car ownership. Customers parked, car hops carried food to them. Menus could be broad, and the car itself became a dining room. Richard and Maurice McDonald, usually called Dick and Mac, operated a successful drive-in in San Bernardino. Their business drew crowds, but success brought friction. A large menu meant complicated preparation. Car hops meant labor and coordination. Plates, glasses, and cutlery had to be collected and washed. Customers could linger. Mistakes and delays multiplied. The brothers did something unusual. They closed a profitable operation and studied its movements. They examined what sold most. They removed much of the menu. They got rid of car hop service. They replaced reusable tableware with paper packaging. Then they reorganized the kitchen around a short list of items, especially hamburgers, fries, and shakes. In 1948, the redesigned restaurant reopened with what they called the speedy service system. A hamburger cost 15 cents. The new kitchen treated preparation as a sequence of specialized actions. One worker could grill patties, another could prepare buns. Condiments could be applied in measured amounts with purpose-built tools. Movement was reduced. Waiting was attacked as a design flaw. Here, the hamburger's physical simplicity became an industrial advantage. The patty was not simply quick to cook. It could pass through separate hands without losing its identity. The product survived the division of labor. A traditional cook controls a dish from beginning to end and adjusts it by judgment. The speedy system transferred more of that judgment into the layout, tools, portions, and rules. Skill did not disappear, it changed location. It moved from individual improvisation into the design of the operation. Customers also received a new role. Without car hops and plates, they carried the food away themselves. The restaurant saved labor and washing. The customer gained speed and a lower price while accepting a more self-service experience. The wrapper was part of the system. So was the service window. So was the limited menu. The burger sat at the center because it connected every decision: ingredients, equipment, labor, packaging, price, and customer movement. The hamburger could now organize the whole restaurant around itself. In that precise sense, it became the test object through which the modern fast food kitchen was designed. The system worked so well that it attracted a salesman from Illinois. Ray Kroc sold multi-mixer milkshake machines. In 1954, he learned that one restaurant in San Bernardino was using several of them. The order suggested extraordinary volume, so he went to see the operation. What he found was not merely a busy hamburger stand, it was a pattern. The McDonald brothers had already begun franchising their concept on a limited scale. Kroc saw the possibility of taking the disciplined sequence he had watched in California and reproducing it across the country. In 1955, he opened a McDonald's restaurant in Des Plaines, Illinois. Through McDonald's System Incorporated, the timing favored expansion. Post-war America was building highways, suburbs, and a culture of routine car travel. Families took more meals on the road. Roadside businesses had to communicate from a moving vehicle. Bright signs, recognizable buildings, parking, and predictable service reduced the risk of stopping somewhere unknown. The Golden Arches performed the same function at highway scale that White Castle's white surfaces had performed at street scale. They made a promise before the customer entered. Kroc's organization pushed for consistency across franchise locations. A franchisee could operate a restaurant, but the value of the brand depended on the meal not becoming a different invention at every address. The bun, patty, equipment, preparation, and service had to remain within defined limits. Training and inspection supported that uniformity. So did a growing network of suppliers capable of delivering ingredients to specifications. The fast food restaurant was no longer an isolated kitchen, It was the visible end of a coordinated chain of farms, processors, bakeries, packaging makers, equipment firms, distribution centers, franchise agreements, and advertising. In 1961, Kroc's company acquired the McDonald brothers' rights. The system then accelerated beyond the scale of its original creators. The hamburger made this expansion legible. Customers did not need to understand the supply network. They only needed to recognize the arches and receive the expected sandwich. Familiarity converted a vast industrial arrangement into a simple purchase. That was the bargain at the heart of fast food. The customer surrendered surprise and received certainty. Certainty has real value. For a traveler, a family with children, a worker on a short break, or anyone counting the money in a pocket, a known menu and price reduce risk. Speed gives time back. A standardized operation can serve large numbers of people without requiring every restaurant to invent itself. The system also opens business ownership through a tested brand and process. Franchising can provide a path into commerce for operators who would struggle to build national recognition alone. In later decades, fast food franchises became entangled with urban policy, minority entrepreneurship, suburban growth, and changing patterns of property and investment. Yet, standardization is never neutral. Every gain is produced by deciding where uncertainty will go. The same burger leaves the cook less freedom to vary it. Faster service divides work into narrower, timed tasks. Holding prices low sends pressure backward through purchasing, staffing, portion size, and supply contracts. As identical buildings and menus spread, independent restaurants compete not only with another meal, but with a national promise. This does not mean every fast food job is identical or every franchise relationship works the same way. It means the operating model seeks to make individual difference less important to the final product. Calling the work unskilled can hide what workers actually do. A rush requires coordination, heat management, food safety, memory, speed, and emotional control. The system depends on these abilities while trying to make the result less dependent on any one employee. That tension is not an accident around the edges of fast food. It comes from the same search for repetition that made the burger scalable. The meal's immigrant history adds another layer to the contradiction. A dish associated with migration and urban adaptation became an icon of national identity. The burger became American not by leaving movement behind, but by absorbing that movement beneath a stable brand. White Castle had made the product trustworthy by showing the grill. McDonald's made the business expandable by making the grill part of a larger script. Soon, that script traveled outside the United States. McDonald's began expanding into international markets in the 1960s. Other hamburger chains followed their own routes. The exported object was not only beef between bread. It was a package of expectations: order at a counter or window, receive food quickly, recognize the brand, and trust that much of the experience has been decided in advance. Yet the global burger never became completely uniform. Local menus adjusted to religious rules, dietary preferences, ingredient prices, and established tastes. Beef might give way to chicken, fish, lamb, or a vegetable patty. Sauces changed. Spices changed. In some markets, the side dishes did more cultural work than the sandwich itself. This adaptation did not defeat standardization, it helped standardization survive. A chain could alter selected ingredients while preserving the deeper format: measured portions, branded service, repeatable equipment, controlled preparation, and a familiar transaction. The contrast is visible at the counter. The flavors may announce a particular place, while the order sequence, packaging, kitchen stations, and promise of speed remain recognizable. Local difference enters the product without dismantling the machine around it. The hamburger therefore became two things at once. It was an emblem of American commercial culture, and it was a flexible container into which other cultures could place their own flavors and limits. That dual identity explains why arguments about authenticity never settle it. There is no single final hamburger. Even the American version had emerged from migration, urban labor, regional experimentation, industrial technology, and commercial competition. What remained stable was not the recipe. It was the architecture of repetition. Look at an ordinary hamburger now. The top bun appears simple, but it had to arrive at a specified size and texture. The patty looks like a basic piece of ground beef, but its shape made rapid, consistent cooking possible. Pickles, onions, cheese, and sauce are arranged as choices, yet in a chain restaurant their quantities are often carefully controlled. The wrapper turns the meal into luggage. The counter, screen, grill, timer, freezer, delivery network, and franchise agreement remain outside the frame. That is the hidden history inside the sandwich. German immigrants did not hand America a finished fast food empire. They helped circulate a chopped beef dish and the name attached to it. Industrial cities gave that dish a new function. Vendors made it portable. White Castle made it respectable and repeatable. The McDonald brothers reorganized the kitchen around it. Ray Kroc and a generation of franchise operators made the system travel. No one of them invented the entire machine. Each changed the point at which value was created. The earliest value came from making tougher or irregular meat easier to sell and eat. The street vendor added value by saving a worker time. White Castle added trust. McDonald's added speed. Franchising added reach. Global adaptation added local recognition. At every stage, the hamburger became less dependent on one place and one cook. That is what allowed it to become available almost everywhere. It is also what made the meal an instrument for reorganizing kitchens, jobs, streets, supplies, and expectations. The hamburger is often described as America's national food. Its more revealing identity is as an immigrant-associated meal that taught modern business how to sell sameness as freedom. The next time a wrapped burger is placed in your hand, the most important ingredient may be the one you cannot see, a system designed so that the person, place, and moment of purchase matter less than the promise that it will feel familiar. For more histories of the systems hidden inside everyday food, subscribe to The Bitter Yield.